Ambassador Park Yuna stood at the window of her private quarters on Kelos Prime, watching the stars. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years of learning the Veth language, studying their customs, and understanding their history. Tomorrow, she would sit across from the Veth High Council and begin the first real peace talks between humanity and the Dominion. Her assistant, a young man named Kim Taiho, entered the room with a tablet in his hands. He looked nervous, which was normal for him before important events. "Ambassador, the security team wants to review the route one more time," he said. Yuna smiled at him. She was 42 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and calm eyes that had seen many difficult negotiations. "Tell them I trust their work. We have reviewed it enough." "The Veth still haven't agreed to the metal detectors," Taiho said quietly. "I know," Yuna turned from the window. "They see it as an insult. If we push too hard on security, they will think we don't trust them. And if they think we don't trust them, these talks will fail before they begin." Taiho wanted to argue. She could see it in his face. But he simply nodded and left the room. Yuna returned to watching the stars. She knew the risks. The Veth Dominion had controlled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They were proud, military-focused, and they saw humanity as children, a young species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. Many Veth believed that talking to humans was beneath them, but there were also Veth who wanted peace. Trade with humanity had brought new medicine, new technology, new ideas. The Dominion was not as strong as it once was, and some of its leaders understood that war with Earth would cost them everything. Yuna believed she could reach those leaders. She had to believe it. Because if she failed, millions would die. The next morning, she dressed in her formal uniform, black with silver trim, the colors of the Terran diplomatic corps. She pinned a small badge to her chest, a white flower, the symbol of peace in Korean tradition. Her mother had given it to her before she left Earth. "Come home safe," her mother had said. "I will," Yuna had promised. The ceremony hall on Kelos Prime was enormous. It was built from white stone that seemed to glow under the lights. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats watching, waiting to see if humanity and the Veth could find common ground. Yuna walked down the center aisle with her head held high. She could feel the eyes on her. Some were curious, some were hopeful, and some, she knew, wanted her to fail. The Veth delegation sat on a raised platform at the front of the hall. There were 5 of them, all wearing the dark red armor of their military caste. Their leader, High Counselor Draven, was ancient by Veth standards, nearly 300 years old. His face was hard, his eyes cold. Yuna stopped before the platform and bowed, a gesture of respect in Veth culture. "High Counselor," she said in their language, "I thank you for this opportunity. Humanity comes not as conquerors or beggars, but as neighbors who wish to build a future together." For a moment, Draven said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "We will hear your words, Ambassador. Whether we accept them remains to be seen." It was not a warm welcome, but it was a start. Yuna turned to address the full assembly. She had practiced this speech 100 times. She spoke of trade, of cultural exchange, of the benefits both species could gain from cooperation. She spoke of the wars that had cost both sides so much, and of the children who deserved to grow up in peace. She was halfway through her speech when she saw movement in the crowd. A figure in black stood up from one of the side sections. Yuna's security team was already moving, but they were too far away. Everything seemed to slow down. The figure raised a weapon, a Veth plasma pistol. She recognized it from her studies and fired. The shot hit Yuna in the chest. She fell. The hall exploded into chaos. Screams filled the air. Security officers rushed forward, but the assassin was already down, killed by Veth guards. Taiho ran to Yuna's side, pressing his hands against the wound, calling her name, but Yuna was already gone. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. Every network, every station, every planet heard the same story. The human ambassador had been murdered during a peace ceremony. The assassin was identified as a member of the Iron Claw, a Veth extremist group that opposed any cooperation with other species. On Earth, billions watched in horror. Park Yuna had been a hero to many, a symbol of humanity's hope for a peaceful future among the stars. Now she was dead, killed by the very people she had tried to help. The Terran government demanded answers. They demanded justice. They demanded that the Veth High Council hand over everyone connected to the assassination. The Council's response was cold. The assassin acted alone, High Counselor Draven announced. The Iron Claw is a criminal organization that does not represent the Dominion. This is an internal matter, and we will handle it according to our own laws. No apology? No promise of justice. Not even an acknowledgement that a crime had been committed against humanity. The galaxy waited to see what would happen next. Fleet Admiral Kang Do-yun stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TSS Resolve. He was 55 years old, a veteran of 3 wars, and he had never felt anger like this. Yuna had been his friend. They had served together years ago, before she joined the diplomatic corps. He had watched her work for peace while he prepared for war, and he had respected her for it. Now she was dead, and the Veth were treating it like it meant nothing. His officers waited for orders. The fleet was ready. Dozens of ships, thousands of soldiers, all prepared to strike at the Dominion. One word from Do-yun, and the war would begin, but Do-yun did not give that word. Instead, he opened a channel to every human ship, every colony, every station in the galaxy. "This is Fleet Admiral Kang Do-yun," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made everyone who heard it go still. Ambassador Park Yuna dedicated her life to peace. She believed that humanity could show the galaxy a better way. Today we will honor her belief. He paused. We do not forget. We do not forgive without reason. But we will not give them the war they expect. Instead, we will show them and everyone else who we truly are. He closed the channel. Across the galaxy. Humans waited. Other species watched, confused. The Veth laughed, calling humanity weak. None of them understood what was coming, and that was exactly what Do-yun wanted. The first week after Ambassador Park Yuna's death, every human ship left Veth space. Cargo vessels, passenger transports, research stations, all of them packed up and departed without a word. Trade contracts were canceled. Communication channels went dark. The border between Terran and Dominion territory became a wall of silence. The Veth High Council watched this happen and felt satisfied. They had expected threats, demands, perhaps even military strikes. Instead, humanity had simply retreated. High Counselor Draven addressed his people with pride in his voice. The humans have shown their true nature, he declared. They are cowards who run when faced with strength. The Dominion has nothing to fear from such weakness. His words were broadcast across all Veth colonies. Citizens celebrated in the streets. The Iron Claw, the extremist group responsible for the assassination, was praised as heroes who had defended Veth honor, but not everyone was celebrating on the Veth colony world of Torith. A hospital administrator named Vika stared at her supply reports with growing concern. Human medical compounds, treatments for genetic diseases, surgical materials, advanced antibiotics had stopped arriving. She had enough supplies for perhaps 2 months. After that, her patients would start dying. She sent urgent messages to the capital, asking for help. The response was always the same: find alternative suppliers, but there were no alternative suppliers. Human medical technology was years ahead of anyone else in the galaxy. Other species could produce similar treatments, but not at the same quality. And not at the same speed. VKK was not the only one facing this problem on the industrial world of Korith. Factory managers discovered that their automated systems were failing. Human engineers had designed the software that ran everything from power plants to water treatment facilities. Without regular updates and maintenance, errors began to multiply. Machines broke down. Production slowed. On the agricultural moon of Celos, farmers watched their crops wither. Human scientists had developed the fertilizers and growth accelerants that made their soil productive. Without those compounds, the soil returned to its natural state, barren and useless. Across the Dominion, small problems became large problems. Large problems became crises. And still, humanity said nothing. Director Cho Minho sat in his office on Earth, reading reports from across the galaxy. He was 48 years old, thin and quiet, with the patient eyes of a man who understood that some battles were won by waiting. As head of the Strategic Response Division, Minho had spent months preparing for this moment. He had studied the VEF economy, their supply chains, their dependencies. He knew exactly how much they relied on human technology, even if they would never admit it. Phase 1 is complete, his deputy reported. All human assets have been withdrawn from Dominion territory. No casualties. Minho nodded. And the other species? They're watching. Some have reached out to ask what we're planning, but we've given them no information. Good. Let them watch. The deputy hesitated. Sir, some of our allies are concerned. They think we should be taking military action? They say the Veth will see our silence as weakness. Minho looked up from his reports. The Veth see everything as weakness unless it involves weapons and blood. That is exactly why we will not give them what they expect. He set down his tablet. Ambassador Park believed that humanity could change how the galaxy thinks about power. We are going to prove she was right. Weeks passed. Then months. The Veth began to struggle. Their economy, which had seemed so strong, started to crack. Medical shortages led to protests on colony worlds. Factory shutdowns led to unemployment. Food shortages led to rationing. Other species in the galaxy started to notice. The Veth had always presented themselves as the dominant power in their region, strong, independent, needing nothing from anyone. Now the truth was becoming clear. They needed humanity more than they had ever admitted. And humanity was gone. The first cracks in the Dominion's alliances appeared in the third month. The Torani Collective, a trading partner of the Veth for centuries, announced that they were suspending all joint operations until the situation with humanity was resolved. We cannot afford to be associated with a government that refuses to seek justice for an assassination, the Torani representative said. Our own trade with humanity is too valuable to risk. Other species followed. One by one, the Veth's allies stepped back. Not because they cared about Ambassador Park, many of them had never met her, but because they cared about their own interests. And their interests were tied to humanity. High Counselor Draven watched his empire's influence shrink and felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. He called an emergency meeting of the council. The humans are trying to starve us into submission, he said. We must respond with strength. I propose we seize their cargo ships in neutral space and force them to resume trade. One of the younger counselors, a female named Taran, shook her head. That would be an act of war. And if we go to war with humanity, we will lose. We are the Veth Dominion. Draven shouted. We do not lose. We are the Veth Dominion, Taran replied calmly, and we are running out of medicine, food, and functioning machines. Our allies are abandoning us. Our colonies are protesting. How long do you think we can fight a war in these conditions? Draven had no answer. On Earth, Admiral Kang Do-yun received regular reports from Director Cho Minho. He read them carefully, tracking the Dominion's decline. Part of him felt satisfaction. The Veth were finally understanding that their arrogance had consequences, but another part of him felt only sadness. He visited Yuna's family on a quiet afternoon. Her mother lived in a small house outside Seoul, surrounded by a garden that Yuna had planted as a child. The old woman served tea and spoke about her daughter with tears in her eyes. She always believed in peace, the mother said. Even when others told her it was impossible. Even when she knew the risks. Do-yun nodded. She was braver than any soldier I ever knew. What will happen now? The mother asked. Will there be war? Do-yun set down his tea. No, there will be something else. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your daughter wanted to show the galaxy that humanity was different. We are going to honor that wish. But first, the Veth must understand what they did. They must feel the weight of it. The mother studied him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. Make them understand, she said. But do not become like them. That is not what Yuna would have wanted. Do-yun promised. 6 months after the assassination, humanity finally broke its silence, but they did not send ships. They did not send soldiers. They did not send threats or demands. They sent the truth. The broadcast began at exactly midday, Universal Standard Time. It reached every network in the galaxy, every station, every colony, every ship with a receiver. There was no warning, no announcement. One moment, screens showed normal programming. The next, they showed the symbol of the Terran Republic. Then Commander Lee Jisu appeared. She was 40 years old, with short gray hair and a scar across her left cheek from a battle she never spoke about. As head of the diplomatic fleet, she had spent months working with Director Cho Minho to prepare this moment. Now she sat in a simple room, looking directly at the camera, and began to speak. My name is Commander Lee Jisu of the Terran Republic. 6 months ago, Ambassador Park Yuno was murdered while trying to bring peace to our region of space. The Veth Dominion claimed that her killer acted alone, that he was a member of an extremist group with no connection to the government. They offered no justice, no apology, and no accountability. She paused. They lied. The screen changed to show documents, communications, financial records, official orders. Jisu's voice continued over the images. For 6 months, we have gathered evidence. We have traced every connection, verified every source, and confirmed every detail. What we found was clear. The assassination of Ambassador Park was not the act of extremists. It was ordered by members of the Veth High Council itself. The galaxy went still. 3 counselors Draven, Vorik and Kessin funded and directed the Iron Claw. They provided weapons, intelligence, and protection. They chose the target and the timing. They wanted Ambassador Park dead because they feared what peace would mean for their power. The screen showed intercepted messages between the counselors and Iron Claw leaders. It showed bank transfers moving through hidden accounts. It showed surveillance footage of secret meetings. The evidence was overwhelming, but Jisu was not finished. The murder of Ambassador Park was a crime, but it was not the first crime the Dominion has hidden from the galaxy. Her voice became harder. For the past 6 months, we have also gathered evidence of other actions that the Veth have buried for centuries. The screen changed again. Now it showed images of destroyed cities, mass graves, burned fields. It showed documents describing forced relocations, cultural erasure, and deliberate starvation. It showed testimony from survivors of Veth conquest, members of species that had been absorbed into the Dominion and forgotten. The Torith suppression, Jisu said. 40 million dead. The Council claimed it was a natural disaster. More images. The Seleni Purge, 12 million dead. The Council claimed it was a civil war. More images. The Korth famine, 90 million dead. The Council claimed it was crop failure. Species across the galaxy watched in horror. Many of them had traded with the Veth, allied with them, trusted them. Now they were seeing the truth. Jisu's face returned to the screen. We could have responded to Ambassador Park's murder with war. We have the ships. We have the weapons. We have the soldiers. We could have burned Veth worlds and called it justice. She shook her head slowly. We chose a different path. We chose to show the galaxy who the Dominion really is. Now, she leaned forward slightly. We are not asking you to fight for us. We are not asking you to hate the Veth people. Many of them are victims of their own government, just like the species they conquered. We are only asking you to see the truth, and to decide for yourselves what the Dominion deserves. The broadcast ended. The reaction was immediate. On Veth colonies, citizens watched in shock. Many of them had believed their government stories about the Torith suppression, the Seleni Purge, the Korth famine. They had been taught that these events were tragedies, not crimes. Now they learned that their leaders had lied to them for generations. Protests erupted on a dozen worlds. People demanded answers. They demanded accountability. They demanded change. On other planets, leaders who had supported the Dominion rushed to distance themselves. Alliances that had lasted centuries collapsed in days. Trade agreements were canceled. Diplomatic relations were suspended. The Veth found themselves alone, High Counselor Draven watched his empire crumble and felt something beyond fear. He felt rage. He ordered the military to suppress the protests. He ordered the communications networks to block the human broadcast. He ordered the arrest of anyone who questioned the council, but it was too late. The truth was already everywhere. People had copied the broadcast, shared it, spread it through channels the government could not control. Every attempt to silence it only made it spread faster. On the colony world of Torith, the same world that had suffered the suppression, citizens surrounded the governor's mansion and refused to leave. They chanted the names of the dead. They held images of the mass graves. They demanded that the governor answer for what his government had done. The governor fled in the night. Similar scenes played out across the Dominion. Governors resigned. Military officers refused orders. Entire colonies declared that they no longer recognized the High Council's authority, and in the capital, Councilors Vorik and Kessin were arrested by their own guards. The guards had seen the evidence. They had seen the proof that their leaders had ordered murder. They would not protect such men any longer. Draven remained free, protected by his personal security. But he was trapped in the council chambers, surrounded by a city that wanted him dead. On Earth, Director Cho Minho received reports of the chaos with quiet satisfaction. Everything was proceeding as planned. The Dominion was destroying itself, and humanity had not fired a single shot, but Minho knew that chaos alone was not enough. The Veth needed a path forward, a way to rebuild that did not lead back to the same corrupt system. Without that, the collapse would only bring more suffering. He sent a message to Admiral Kong Do-yun. It's time for Phase 3. Do-yun read the message on the bridge of the TSS Resolve. Around him, his officers waited for orders. They had been waiting for 6 months, ready to fight. Ready to avenge Ambassador Park? Now they would finally move, but not to war. Do-yun opened a channel to his fleet. All ships, prepare to move to Veth space. Our mission is not conquest. It is not punishment. It is justice, and after justice, something the galaxy has never seen from a human fleet. He paused. We are going to help them rebuild. His officers exchanged confused glances. Help the Veth? After what they had done? But Do-yun's face was calm. He was thinking of Yuna, of her belief that humanity could show the galaxy a different way. He was thinking of her mother's words, do not become like them. He would not. Set course for the Veth homeworld, he ordered. It's time to end this. The Terran fleet arrived at the Veth homeworld on a cold morning. 37 ships in perfect formation, led by the TSS Resolve with Admiral Kong Do-yun on the bridge. They did not fire. They did not threaten. They simply took position in orbit and waited. On the surface, the Veth military prepared for battle. Defense platforms powered up. Fighters launched from underground bases. Soldiers took positions around the capital city, ready to fight to the last breath, but the attack never came. Instead, Admiral Do-yun sent a single message to the surface. We are here to deliver terms. We request a meeting with whoever now speaks for the Veth people. The old High Council was gone. Vorik and Kessin had been executed by their own citizens 3 days earlier, killed in the streets by a mob that had lost all patience. Draven had escaped the capital but was hunted across the planet. A fugitive with no allies left. In their place, a temporary government had formed, a group of military officers, colony representatives, and community leaders who were trying to hold their civilization together. Their leader was a general named Taran, the same counselor who had warned Draven that war would destroy them. Taryn agreed to the meeting. She traveled to orbit in a small shuttle, alone except for 2 guards. As her ship approached the Resolve, she looked out the window at the human fleet and felt the weight of history pressing down on her. The Veth had never surrendered to anyone. They had never accepted terms from a younger species. The shame of it burned in her chest, but she also knew that she had no choice. The shuttle docked, and Taran walked through the corridors of the human flagship. Human soldiers watched her pass, their faces unreadable. She expected hatred, anger, perhaps even violence. Instead, they simply stepped aside and let her go. Admiral Do-yun was waiting for her in a conference room. He sat alone at a long table, no guards, no aides. On the table in front of him was a single tablet. Taryn sat across from him. For a moment neither spoke, then Do-yun slid the tablet across the table. "These are our terms," he said. "Read them carefully." Taryn picked up the tablet and began to read. As she did, her expression changed from tension to confusion to something she could not name. The terms were harsh, but they were not cruel. Full reparations to Ambassador Park Yuna's family, a significant sum, but not impossible. The complete dissolution of the Iron Claw and all extremist military factions, with their leaders handed over for trial by a joint human Veth court. A new government structure with independent oversight from neutral species, to ensure that power could never again be concentrated in a small group of corrupt leaders. Memorial stations built in. Ambassador Park's name on every Veth colony world, to remember what had been done and ensure it was never forgotten. And finally, the part that made Taryn look up at Do-yun with disbelief: a commitment from humanity to help the Veth rebuild. "This is a trick," she said. "It is not. You want to help us? After we murdered your ambassador? After everything you revealed about our government?" Do-yun's face remained calm. Ambassador Park did not want war. She wanted a future where humanity and the Veth could live as neighbors. "If we destroy your civilization, that future dies with it." He paused. "We will hold you accountable for what was done, but we will not make your people suffer for the crimes of their leaders." Taryn set down the tablet. Her hands were shaking. "Why?" she asked. "Any other species would burn our worlds. Any other species would take everything we have and leave us in ashes. Why are you different?" Do-yun was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone I respected very much believed that strength without cruelty was the highest form of power. She died trying to prove it." He met Taryn's eyes. "I will not let her be wrong." The next few weeks were chaos. The Veth interim government accepted humanity's terms. They had no other option. But acceptance was only the beginning. The work of rebuilding a broken civilization was enormous. Captain Beak Hannah led the humanitarian mission. She was 35 years old, calm under pressure, and she had volunteered for this assignment the moment she heard about it. Her parents had been refugees during one of Earth's last wars, and she understood what it meant to lose everything and start again. Her first stop was the colony world of Torith, where the medical shortages had become a full crisis. Hospitals were running out of supplies. People were dying from diseases that should have been easily treated. Hannah's team arrived with cargo ships full of medicine, equipment, and personnel. They set up treatment centers in every major city. They trained local doctors and nurses. They worked 18-hour days, sleeping on the floors of clinics, eating whatever they could find. The Veth watched them with suspicion at first. Many expected the humans to demand payment, to hold the medicine hostage, to use their help as leverage. But Hannah and her team asked for nothing. They simply worked. Slowly, the suspicion began to fade. On the industrial world of Korith, human engineers helped repair the failing factory systems. They rewrote software, replaced broken parts, and trained local workers to maintain the machines themselves. On the agricultural moon of Selos, human scientists worked with Veth farmers to restore their soil. They introduced new techniques, new crops, new ways of growing food that did not depend on imported chemicals across the Dominion. Or what had been the Dominion human teams appeared wherever they were needed. They built, they healed. They taught, and they remembered. Every team carried a small white flower pin, the same symbol Ambassador Park had worn on the day she died. It was a reminder of why they were there, and what their mission meant. General Taryn traveled with Captain Hannah for several weeks, watching the human teams work. She had spent her entire life in the military, trained to see other species as enemies or tools. The idea that someone would help without expecting anything in return was foreign to her. One evening, on a transport between colony worlds, she asked Hannah the same question she had asked Admiral Do-yun. "Why are you doing this?" Hannah thought about it for a moment. "Because we can," she said simply. "And because it's right? But we killed your ambassador. We lied about it. We would have let you suffer without lifting a finger." "Yes," Hannah agreed. And if we do the same thing back, nothing changes. The galaxy stays the same, everyone fighting, everyone taking, everyone afraid. She looked at Taran. Ambassador Park believed we could be different. Not better than everyone else, just different. We're trying to prove she was right. Taran had no response to that. After a long silence, she spoke again. The galaxy will think you're weak. They'll think they can take advantage of you. Hannah smiled slightly. Maybe some will, but most will see something else. She gestured toward the window where stars filled the darkness. They'll see that we exposed the truth about your government without firing a shot. They'll see that we brought one of the oldest empires in the galaxy to its knees through patience and evidence. And then they'll see that we helped you rebuild instead of leaving you to die. She turned back to Taran. That's not weakness. That's power. A different kind of power than anyone has seen before. Taran looked out at the stars and said nothing. But something in her eyes had changed. On Earth, Admiral Kong Do-yun received reports of the rebuilding mission every day. He read about the hospitals on Torith, the factories on Korath, the farms on Celos. He saw images of human and Veth working side by side, building something new. And for the first time since Yuna's death, he felt something like peace. They were not done yet. The work would take years, maybe decades. There would be setbacks, conflicts, moments when everything seemed ready to fall apart, but they had started. They had shown the galaxy what was possible. Yuna would have been proud. 10 years had passed since the death of Ambassador Park Yuna. The galaxy had changed. The Veth Dominion no longer existed. In its place stood the Veth Cooperative, a democratic union of worlds with elected leaders, independent courts, and a constitution that protected the rights of every citizen. The red armor of the military caste had been replaced by blue uniforms that symbolized service rather than conquest. General Taran had become the cooperative's first elected president. She had won by a large margin, supported by citizens who remembered how she had worked alongside the humans to rebuild their civilization. In her victory speech, she had spoken about the past without hiding from it. We were an empire built on lies and violence, she had said. We hurt countless people across countless worlds. We cannot change that history, but we can choose to be different. We can choose to build something better. The memorial stations that humanity had demanded stood on every Veth world. They were simple structures, white stone, like the hall where Yuna had been killed, with her name inscribed above the entrance. Inside, visitors could learn about her life, her work, and her death. They could read about the crimes of the Old Dominion and the evidence that had exposed them. They could see images of the rebuilding effort and the partnership that had grown from it. Millions visited the memorials every year. Some came to mourn. Some came to learn. Some came to promise that they would do better. On Earth, the Strategic Response Division had been renamed. It was now called the Park Yuna Institute for Galactic Diplomacy. Director Cho Min-ho had retired, and a new generation of diplomats was being trained in the methods he had developed: patience, evidence, truth, and mercy. The Institute's main building had a statue of Yuna in the courtyard. She was shown standing tall, wearing her diplomatic uniform, with the white flower pin on her chest. Students passed her every day on their way to classes. Many of them touched the base of the statue for luck before important exams. Captain Beak Hannah had returned to Earth after 5 years leading the humanitarian mission. She had been offered promotions, awards, commands. She had turned them all down. Instead, she taught at the Institute, sharing what she had learned about rebuilding broken societies. The hardest part isn't the medicine or the machines, she told her students. The hardest part is trust. You have to show up every day and do the work, even when people don't believe you're really there to help. You have to keep going until they see that you mean it. Her students listened carefully. Many of them would go on to serve in diplomatic missions across the galaxy, carrying Yuna's legacy forward. Commander Lee Jisu had also retired. She lived quietly on a small colony world, far from the politics and attention of Earth. Occasionally, journalists would find her and ask for interviews about the broadcast that had changed everything. She always refused. I was just the messenger, she would say. The truth did the real work. But sometimes, late at night, she would watch recordings of the broadcast and remember the fear she had felt. Not fear of failure, fear that humanity would become what it was fighting against. Fear that they would use their power for cruelty instead of justice. They had not. And that meant more to her than any award or recognition the galaxy had watched humanity's response to. Ambassador Park's death with confusion, then disbelief, then something like wonder. No one had expected silence. No one had expected truth instead of weapons. And no one had expected mercy. Other species began to study what had happened. Diplomats and military leaders analyzed every decision, trying to understand how a young species had achieved what ancient empires could not. Academic papers were written. Courses were taught. The phrase, Terran response, became shorthand for a strategy that used restraint and truth to achieve victory, but for most people, the impact was simpler. They looked at what humanity had done and felt something they had not felt before. Hope. If the humans could face injustice without becoming cruel, maybe others could too. If the humans could help their enemies rebuild instead of destroying them, maybe peace was actually possible. If one species could be different, maybe the galaxy could change. On the 10th anniversary of Yuna's death, Admiral Kang Do-yeon traveled to Kalos Prime. He was 65 now. Retired from the fleet, living quietly with his family. His hair had gone completely gray, and his step was slower than it had been. But his eyes were still sharp, and his back was still straight. The memorial on Kalos Prime was the largest of them all. It stood on the spot where the ceremony hall had been, the same hall where Yuna had been killed. The old building had been torn down and replaced by a garden of white flowers surrounding a statue of the ambassador. Do-hyeon walked through the garden alone. He had visited this place many times over the years, but today felt different. Somehow, he stopped at the base of the statue and looked up at Yuna's face. The sculptor had captured her well, the calm eyes, the slight smile, the quiet strength. "We did what you asked," he said softly. "We showed them who we are. I hope it was enough." He placed a single white flower at the base of the statue, next to hundreds of others that visitors had left. As he turned to leave, he saw a small figure watching him from the edge of the garden. It was a Veth child, no more than 8 or 9, years old, with curious eyes and nervous posture. Do-yeon stopped and waited. The child approached slowly, glancing between the statue and the old human. "Are you Admiral Kang?" the child asked. "I am. My teacher told us about you. She said you commanded the fleet that came to our world." "I did." The child looked at the statue again. "Why didn't you destroy us?" "Everyone thought you would. My grandmother said she was sure the humans would burn everything." Do-yeon considered the question. He had been asked it many times by many people. Politicians, journalists, historians, all of them wanting to understand, but this was a child. A child deserved a simple answer. He knelt down so that he was at eye level with the young Veth. Because Ambassador Park believed that showing strength without cruelty was the highest form of power, he said. She dedicated her life to that belief. When she died, we had a choice. We could have proven her wrong by choosing revenge, or we could prove her right by choosing something harder. He paused. We chose to prove her right. The child thought about this for a moment. Was it hard? The child asked. To not be angry? Do-yeon smiled slightly. We were angry. We are still angry sometimes. But anger is not a good reason to hurt people. It takes practice to remember that, even when you feel it strongly. The child nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for later. Then, without warning, the child ran off toward a group of other children playing near the garden's entrance. Some of them were Veth, some were human. They mixed together easily, chasing each other through the flowers, laughing in a half-dozen different languages. Do-yeon watched them for a long time. This was what Yuna had wanted. Not monuments or speeches or academic papers. Just children playing together without fear. In a galaxy that had learned something new about power, he took one last look at the statue, then turned and walked away. The stars had expected fire. Humanity had given them something else, and the galaxy would never be the same in the years that followed. The story of humanity's response to Ambassador Park Yuna's death became legend. It was told and retold across 1,000 worlds, changing slightly with each telling but keeping its core truth intact. When faced with injustice, humanity had chosen patience. When they had the power to destroy, they had chosen to expose. When they could have demanded submission, they had offered rebuilding. It was not the only way to respond to harm. It was not always the right way. But it was proof that another way existed, that strength did not have to mean cruelty, and that power did not have to mean domination. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, on worlds that had known only conflict for centuries, people began to wonder if they could do the same. That was Ambassador Park Yuna's legacy. That was what humanity left among the stars.